There are weapons that win wars. There are weapons that are convenient, practical, and effective. And then there are weapons that win movies. The Thompson is one of the most recognizable submachine guns of the 20th century. Even those unfamiliar with military history know it. With its rugged silhouette, massive frame, and distinctive drummer box magazine, the Thompson became a symbol of American power long before the first soldier landed in Normandy. In movies, it's always in the hands of heroes. In newsreels, it's in the hands of Marines. In the public consciousness, it's the ideal submachine gun of World War II. But war rarely coincides with cinema. The Thompson wasn't born on the front lines. It emerged in the years after World War I as a weapon for entirely different purposes. It was designed for police, security, and riot control. It gained its fame not on the battlefields of Europe, but on the streets of Chicago, in the hands of gangsters, criminal syndicates, and federal agents. It was then that its first myth took shape: a powerful, reliable, and impressive machine gun that solves problems. By the time World War II began, the Thompson was already a legend, but a civilian one, not a military one. When the U.S. entered the war, the Army received a weapon with a reputation, but no real experience in large-scale frontline use. And this is where the gap between image and reality begins. In the movies, the Thompson is a weapon of confidence. It's always under control, always accurate, always inspires fear. But on the real front, soldiers faced a completely different machine gun. Heavy, expensive, inconvenient for long marches, difficult to manufacture, and most importantly, not the best suited for total war, where the weapons count is not in the tens, but in the millions. The Thompson weighed nearly 5 kilograms. In combat, this meant fatigue. On the march, it meant damnation. In the jungle, it meant extra weight that had to be lugged for hours. Its powerful .45 ACP cartridge was effective at close range, but had limited range and low penetration compared to rifle ammunition. And its production cost the U.S. Army several times more than alternatives. And yet, Thompson continued to be used. Why? Because the myth already existed. Because it looked impressive. Because it had become part of the American soldier's image. Because at the beginning of the war, there were few alternatives. But the further the war progressed, the more the Army began to ask itself, was the Thompson really as good as people said it was? The answer was unpleasant. The American Army quickly realized that for mass warfare, it needed a cheap, simple, and reliable tool, not an iconic assault rifle. This is how the M3 Grease was born. The Thompson gun is a weapon without glamour, without a legend, but ideal for production in the front. This was the first warning sign for the Thompson. It was beginning to be phased out, not because it was bad, but because it was in what the war required. It's important to understand, the Thompson isn't a failure. It was high quality, reliable, and powerful. But its reputation was inflated. It was made into a symbol, and that symbol no longer corresponded to the reality of the front. This is the definition of an overhyped weapon, when expectations significantly exceed its actual combat value. In this episode of GunLore, we'll explore the Thompson submachine gun without its movie aura. We'll look at why it became a legend, the problems hidden behind its image, what soldiers thought of it, and why the U.S. Army eventually began to phase it out. This isn't a story of debunking, it's a story of myth colliding with war. The history of the Thompson submachine gun begins long before World War II. Its development began immediately after the end of World War I, in 1919. The weapon's creator was American General John Taliaferro Thompson, who envisioned the future of warfare as a series of mobile and fleeting clashes, where dense automatic fire at short ranges would play a decisive role. However, the Thompson wasn't originally designed as a military weapon. It was designed for police use, strategic site protection, and riot control. That's why early versions were characterized by their high weight, high-quality machining, and a focus on reliability rather than mass production. It was a weapon for peacetime, not all-out war. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Thompson submachine gun gained notoriety. It was actively used by criminal gangs and federal agents. Newspapers, newsreels, and later feature films made the Thompson a symbol of strength, power, and firepower. By the start of World War II, the myth was fully formed. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, the Thompson submachine gun was one of the few available assault rifles. The Army received a weapon with a reputation, but no experience in widespread frontline service. Thompson Model 1928 became the base model, followed by simplified versions, the Thompson Model 1941 and the Thompson Model 1942. Despite the simplifications, the assault rifle remained heavy and expensive. The Thompson weighed approximately 4.9 kilograms unloaded. By comparison, most submachine guns of the time weighed significantly less. During long marches, landings, and combat patrols, this became a serious problem. The Thompson used a .45 caliber automatic pistol cartridge developed in the early 20th century. This ammunition offered high stopping power at short ranges, but had several limitations. The effective firing range rarely exceeded 50 to 70 meters. Beyond these distances, accuracy dropped, penetration diminished, and the trajectory became too steep. In the conditions of the European front, and especially in the open terrain of the Pacific Theater, this was a serious drawback. Furthermore, ammunition quickly ran out. The cartridges were heavy, the magazines were bulky, and the drum magazines, iconic in cinema, were rarely used in practice due to their unreliability and difficulty reloading. One of the key factors that made the Thompson overvalued was its production cost. At the beginning of the war, a single Thompson cost the U.S. Army several times more than simpler alternatives. The weapon required precision machining, high-quality materials, and extensive machining. This was unacceptable for a total war. The Army needed hundreds of thousands, then millions of weapons. The Thompson simply didn't fit into this logic. That is why, already in 1943, the American Army began to actively switch to the Model 3 assault rifle, better known as the Grizz gun. It was primitive and unaesthetic, but it was much cheaper and produced faster. Soldiers' reviews of the Thompson were mixed. It was respected for its reliability and short-range firepower. In close combat, especially in buildings and jungles, it was deadly. But it also, cursed for the mass, criticized for being uncomfortable to wear for long periods of time, were considered obsolete already in the middle of the war. For officers and assault teams, the Thompson still made sense. But for the average infantryman, it was increasingly perceived as unnecessary baggage. By the middle of World War II, it became clear that the Thompson was a weapon of a bygone conflict. It was designed for localized clashes and police operations, not industrial warfare. It wasn't immediately removed from service. It remained in use until the end of the war. But its role gradually diminished, giving way to cheaper and more practical solutions that better suited the realities of the front. The Thompson was overrated not because it was a bad weapon. It was overrated because its image outweighed its actual combat role. Its myth predates the war and proves ill-suited to the new type of warfare. The history of the Thompson submachine gun is a rare example of a weapon becoming a legend even before it passes its ultimate test. Its cult following formed long before World War II. It was born in the era of newspaper headlines, gangster chronicles, and the first sound films. The Thompson entered the war already famous, and that very fact played a cruel joke on it. In the public consciousness, the Thompson has forever remained the weapon of the American soldier. It's associated with the Normandy landings, the Marines, storming positions, and confident firepower. But real war rarely matches this image. On the front lines, it's not legend that's valued, but practicality. Not status, but effectiveness. And this is where the Thompson began to fail. By the middle of World War II, it became clear that the Thompson submachine gun was a weapon of transition. It was designed for small-scale conflicts where quality and reliability were more important than mass production. But the war of the 1940s was different. It was a war of factories, assembly lines, and logistics. Under these conditions, a heavy, expensive, and difficult-to-manufacture assault rifle proved to be a liability, not an advantage. It's important to emphasize the Thompson wasn't a bad weapon. It was powerful, reliable, and deadly in close combat. It performed admirably in jungles, buildings, and confined spaces. But it was unoptimal, and in a total war, that's practically a death sentence. That's why the U.S. Army began searching for a replacement. Not because the Thompson was failing in combat, but because it was failing in the economics of war. It was gradually being replaced by simpler, cheaper models, lacking in glamour but ideal for mass production. It was a pragmatic, cold-blooded calculation, and it proved correct. But despite this, the Thompson didn't disappear. It continued to be used until the end of the war. It remained in the hands of officers, assault groups, and units, where its advantages still outweighed its disadvantages. And after the war, it became firmly entrenched in the culture. And here the Thompson achieved its greatest victory, not on the front lines, but in memory. Film, television, and later video games transformed it into an icon. Its image was so powerful that it overshadowed the facts. For millions, the Thompson became synonymous with the automatic weapon of World War II, even though in practice its role was far more modest. Thompson does, an overrated weapon. Not because it was bad, but because the expectations created by the myth significantly exceeded its actual contribution to the war. It became a symbol before it became a mass-produced instrument of the front. Thompson's story clearly demonstrates the dangers of confusing image with reality. War doesn't reward beauty and recognizability. It rewards simplicity, reliability, and the ability to be produced in the millions. The Thompson didn't meet these requirements, and so it gave way to others. Today, the Thompson remains an important part of arms history. It is studied, collected, and reproduced in replicas. It deserves respect, but not blind worship. Its place is not on the list of ideal weapons of war, but on the list of the most misunderstood.